All right, welcome to my video for option C, the final option and the final part of layer 3 VPNs before I move on to another topic. One thing I wanted to demonstrate, so I had in between videos gone and set up option 3. So kind of the main intent of this is to do all the verification steps and then just do 1 or 2 Wireshark captures of the interesting links. But before I do that, I do want to show kind of an interesting way we can go and see the differences between option 3 and option 2. And this took some pre-preparation on my part, so we're only going to look at it on one device, and we're only going to look at the differences between option B and option C. So the main difference is going to be scalability, but there'll be lots of different configuration. So here's a way that can happen. You can notice here I'm on ASBR1, and if I do file list, I've got some extra files here. So these files, to get them, I did a show configuration, and then once you do the pipe key here, you've got a number of different options. One of them is save. So you can save the output of your configuration to, for example, example.save. And now if I do, of course you need to include the actual command. And now if I do a file list again, you can see I've got that example save in there. So I'll just do a file delete because I won't need that one. And right now I've got the configuration loaded for option C. But one really neat thing you can do by saving those files, and you can only do this from configuration mode, is remember the show pipe compare command. So you can see here, there's no changes. I went in there for the first time, but I am changing, or by default, what I'm comparing when I do show pipe compare is the candidate config to the active config. But you don't have to just compare the candidate config to the active config. You can also compare file list, one of these saved configurations, to the active config. So let's go ahead and do that. Show pipe compare. And now if I do a question mark afterward, you can see I've got the option to compare it to those files that I saved and to any rollbacks. So I can see what it will look like if I roll back, compare it to the last rollback. But more interesting, we can see what the difference is between option C and option B, because I've got option B saved in this file and I've got option C in my active configuration. So we can see there are a lot of differences. On the port facing PE1, we're going to have a different IP. So we're going to have different IPs on both of those ports. The other difference, you can see we've got an extra command under protocols MPLS for traffic engineering, BGP, IGP, both ribs. That's going to be unique to option 3. Option 3 also adds a new interface into MPLS. It has a new, looks like it's a BGP internal group, so an IBGP configuration is different. It's got multiple different groups, and it doesn't have, so here's the old IBGP configuration from option B. You can see if I were to compare it to the configuration for option B, this configuration here as part of option C would be removed, and option B would add this here. And you can see that makes sense because with those different, let's see here. So I'm not sure what the differences are there. It looks like, okay. So you've got next export, next hop self. You've got a whole nother export policy here that you did not have. And I believe that's part of option, I thought it was part of option C, but that's a nice thing. You can always go ahead and check by doing a file show option B. And you can even do a match on this. So we can just go right to the area that we found interesting, which was that next hop self. So I don't see it in option B, but sure enough, I see it in option C. So this next hop self is going to be part of option C. So we're comparing, we can see, okay, so it looks like the plus signs were kind of the opposite way I was thinking about it. So if we compare the active config to the saved config for option B, it's going to show up that, okay, this is our active config. We have this extra, but the file you're comparing it to does not. It has this. Let's just take a look at that again, kind of get a better understanding for that. And I encourage you, of course, if you have Juniper Olive set up or a lab of your own, or you're in prod, this is the kind of thing you can go and do in prod, just as long as you don't hit commits and you always do a rollback 0 and an exit. You can even go and load up the configs and stuff. You just make sure you're in configure private or configure exclusive, but I would recommend configure private, because if you're in configure, what happens is, so set interface hello0 description hello world. So now I'm in configure mode. I exit out of configure mode, and I want to, oh, that's interesting. Exit with uncommitted changes, yes. So if I go back into configure mode, so now I have configuration that has been changed but not committed. So if I do a show pipe compare, there it is right there until I roll back. So even if I were a different user, I weren't just on the console and there were multiple users, that would show up across users. It's not specific to me. It's not private configuration. So that's something you definitely don't want. If you're going to be working with someone, there's many of other things you can do. You can do a request system message. Yeah, and you can, or a request message. Yeah, to a user, so you can write the messages. I'm sure if you have the internet to an internet connection, any context where you're going to be in a device like this, you'll probably have another internet connection where you can communicate over emails or something like that. So there's really no reason to have that shared commit session like that. So using configure on its own is really kind of something that's really not recommended at all. You always want to use configure private, because you can see if I do that same thing. So set interface hello0 description hello hello world. And now if I discard uncommitted changes, even if I go back into config mode, you can see there's nothing there. If I can go back into configure private, there's nothing there. So it exits clean. It doesn't keep what you did unless you commit it. And that's really important, because you can set up booby traps for people who come in and are using config. If they hit commit and they didn't do a show pipe compare, and you had a config on there that shuts down the uplink that you're using to access the device yourself using in-band management, that person just inadvertently tanked access to that gear for everyone. So really important to use configure private or configure exclusive. I prefer configure exclusive because you can do commit confirmed, but a lot of the gear I work on is accessed by multiple people, and it's just too inconvenient for my coworkers to use that configure exclusive. So just kind of out of a courtesy, I'll use a configure private because I'll give other people a chance to make configurations as well. But I would recommend configure exclusive if you don't want to kind of lock people out. You want other people to be able to make commits while you're in there and going to make commits. I think configure private is perfectly fine to use as well. So the other thing you can do is the command load, and you've got a bunch of different options here. But one thing I can even do, so I've got the active configuration set up for option C, but I can do load override, option B, and now I've got loaded up in my candidate configuration, option B, and I can go ahead and commit that. Okay, that's interesting. Never seen that before. Looks like an assertion failure. So it's dumping out the, oh, and it's rebooting. Okay, well, don't do that. I guess that's the key lesson today is, yeah, you can't always, like, this is what I was talking about before. Like, yeah, it's important to play around and to kind of have that sense of curiosity and learn as much as you can about the gear you're working with. But this is a really good example of how things can happen that you don't expect. So really loading up whole configs in the candidate configuration, using that monitor traffic command without narrowing it down. Those are things that can be really impactful. So you do really need to be careful on any gear that you're on that is prod. It's really not the same kind of gear that's in the lab, and you really have to be kind of respectful of that. But, you know, I would say an extra show command, you know, show detail, something like that, you're good. Like, that's not gonna do something like this. But this particular issue could be that I know there's an issue with Juniper sometimes where if you do a show pipe compare and the information, like the size of the file you're using to compare, which is usually just the candidate configuration or something like that, like if that's too large, it'll overload the RAM and cause a reboot just like this. So things can always go wrong. So just if you're in prod, be really kind of conscious of that. I wouldn't want anyone who has watched this channel to go on the first job and say, oh, I learned in Graham's networking lessons that exploring and being curious and kind of learning all you can on a networking device is a really good thing. So I just did a show pipe compare to the custom file I made, and it's like, no, you're already getting way too beyond yourself. Like, I think that is important to learn and be curious, but you know, you wouldn't, if you were rowing a boat, you wouldn't want to see what it's like to hit the deck as hard as you can with a hammer or something like that. So, but I guess I'll end that here. I'd like to do those verification exercises, and actually that's something that can happen actually, because this is gonna wake up soon. So I'll just do the verification exercises, and then I'll do the Wireshark captures and end the video, because this is going to wake up hopefully within a minute or two. So I'll just get this ready to go here. Down to configuration, verifying. All right, so the first verification command is going to be on PE1, and it might even be interesting to see how this is going to differ. And we can even do that pipe refresh and see it change as that ASBR is coming back online. So 3, 2, 1, any predictions for this? So this won't look any different because, of course, that ASBR is on the other side. Oh, but it does look like it is missing a 192.0.2.1 address. So let's check PE1 and make sure that was configured. Or sorry, CE1, we were checking PE1 before. Okay, that is configured. Let's check the full configuration. So everything is on there. Let's verify that they're in the same area. So, yep, they're in the same area. Yep, okay. So in between videos, I was actually playing around with this one. So I think I'll just load in the configuration for option C on this one. And, oh, but actually I remember that this one was, the reason I showed the ASBR1 device instead of PE1 was because there's no differences on this one between option B and option C. It's only on that ASBR. But this is kind of good to look at. You can see these HOW, H-O-W, and these S. So when you get the pagination, as I showed in the earlier video, if you hit H, you get help for all of the things you can enter. There's this one, save output to a file. So often it'll autocomplete through a space bar or will in some way mess you up while you're in the middle of typing show. So you'll get stuck in that more prompt. I'll rerun that. And you see when you hit S, it'll catch you and then you'll write the rest. And then you'll hit enter here and look, it just wrote this whole part to that file, how. So if you're working in a place where people aren't really experts in Juniper, and even if they are, when you do a file list, you are probably going to see a lot of little extra files like that. So if you're in the lab, you can certainly clean those up. File delete how. And this is interesting because you can see there clearly is a file there named that, but probably by nature of there previously having been two of those files, it's unable to see this one because I already deleted one. Or maybe it has a space at the end or something. Okay. File delete S. But this is another thing where you're really not going to be doing anyone a favor by going in and cleaning these up. So you can just leave them. It's really probably not your place to do that unless you're really, really comfortable on that device or it's in the lab. Because as we saw, which was a really, I think, good thing to see, unexpected things can always happen. So let's go ahead and do that verification again. Show OSPF route instance VPN2 CE1. You can see we're still having that issue where it's not being learned. So we can see we've got an export policy. Let's go ahead and verify that the configuration was entered in properly. We'll start by verifying CE1. Show interfaces. Oops, show configuration interfaces. So could be that it was the wrong, that the interfaces are, well, actually it couldn't be that because this is not having issues. Let's take a look at this again. Okay, so here's something interesting to notice right away. We can see that CE1 is going to have this IP address on the link, but we can see that this isn't in the same subnet. So, of course, it's not going to have that in the table. And this is just in the OSPF table because it's this interface is added to the area. So pretty clearly, you can see that there's going to be issues because the facing ports do not belong to the same subnet. One belongs to this. So let's go ahead and look at the, well, first let's take a screenshot of this just so we know, can remember that what this looks like, and then jump down to PE1 and take a look at the configuration. Oh, okay, so here's the configuration there. So I wonder if the, let's see here, file show option C.save. Okay. So that's interesting. It looks like the configuration in option C that I have doesn't include those changes to the IP address. So I think I'm going to just configure it all again, or just compare it. So I'm going to do a show interfaces and see if there's any differences. Looks like the LO0 won't need any editing, but the other two ones will. So edit interface. And this is the interface to the, and we'll need to reference the topology again. So the FE is the one to the CE, which is going to be 000 on this. And there's a clue here. So one of these has family MPLS and the other one does not. So the one that does not, that's going to be the one going to the CE because that port is going to belong to a special routing instance. So you can't just put family VPLS on this port because this port doesn't belong to the default instance where MPLS will be. You'll get an error message. You'll have to add. So MPLS is going to go on the port facing the PE, not the CE. So you know that this is the port facing the P router, not the CE router. So that's kind of as I'm getting more familiar with this, there's little patterns I can pick up on that make it a bit easier. So I'm going to need a show pipe display set relative, and then this is the one going there. So I gotta delete everything. Yes. Set family INET address 198.51.100.3/24. So show pipe display set relative, delete, yes, set family INET address. Yeah, I'm really glad that that device just randomly rebooted, because that's a really good, like, if anyone's watching this and wants to work as a network engineer professionally, like, that can happen. Like, you can just be working on a device and not even doing anything as like extensive as that, and it can just reboot or be strange. So that's a good reason why having terminal logging set up is really important. So here I could go to settings, I could go to general, yeah, and you can see this log folder location. So I can actually open this folder that has the logs. Looks like folder is empty, but I can set up loggings and it will show everything I did, and I can be like, here's what I did, and if it was something as I was doing in this video, comparing those saved files, it's pretty clear that that's something that you wouldn't want another user of the device to do. So you have a record of what those questionable commands are. And then if it's something that's really benign that you've been doing over and over again and really couldn't see what the issue was, you have the record of that too. So that's kind of another good example of how important it is to set up logging when you're working on production gear. And then for Cisco devices, since everything goes straight into the running config, you can just take everything from your log and paste it right back into the running config if your running config is deleted in the reboot. Something happened, you were unable to save before a reboot, it reboots, it loses your whole config. Well, just open up your logs, as we did here, and grab your configuration you had. It's all going to be in your logs, and just dump it in, and you're right back on your feet. So let's check the configuration I have so far, which is the PE, show pipe compare. So yep, I'm configuring the interfaces. Let's take a look at 00.0. So that looks good. And .1, that looks good. Hello 0 didn't need any changes, so let's check out VPN2, the routing instance. Everything looks good here. Protocols, OSPF. Yep. Protocols. SVP. PLS. Then looks like there's an extra BGP group, so I'll go ahead and get rid of that. Unless it's meant to be configured down here. It looks like it is. But, oh, looks like there's an extra command that didn't make it here. So there's going to be this labeled unicast. So we'll go into here, edit. Now I'm under family INET instead of INET VPN. So I need to go, I'll go here, whoops, and I'll do a top edit. And then show pipe display set relative. I've got set unicast, so I'm going to delete that because it needs to be labeled unicast for option C. Oh, Okay, well, it looks like I don't have the option for label unicast on this. Everyone's a little bit different, every version, so I could do a run show version. You can see the version I'm using, so it probably doesn't have it's not the same version that they're using in the lab here, so it probably doesn't have that option for labeled unicast. So it's just a limitation I need to kind of deal with and see what kind of families there are. iNet. Here we go. Looks like I do have it. And then resolve VPN. Okay, so yeah, I've got everything they got. That's good. Let's see the protocols again. And then BGP group 2 ASBR1. And just do a show. We've got type internal, local address, neighbor. So everything looks great there. Let's go back up here and make sure it looks good. Protocols RSVP, looks good. Protocols MPLS, that looks right. Protocols OSPF. Looks like there's a difference that this isn't a passive route, so we'll go ahead and add that. All right, so moving on. Show protocols BGP group to PE2. So this whole group is missing. Okay. That's interesting. Routing instance is all there. But this whole group is interesting, the one to PE2, so I'm going to add that one there. It's kind of interesting that there is a group to a BGP group to PE2. Seems like it's quite the journey. I'm going to use a underscore instead of a dash. It's like there's a syntax error though when I do that. Oh, I gotta do top. Perfect. Set multi-hop. So it looks like there's some issues here. Family. Oh, okay. So here's another error with the Juniper documentation. It's not worth a downvote. You can figure it out, but it's just one of those things where, you know, it's the end of the workday. Your mind's not really as sharp as it needs to be. So if they tell you to do a capital VPN, you're gonna try a capital VPN. It's not gonna work. Well, that's because it's lowercase. But that's not worth a downvote. So just need to check the routing options and the policy options for both the BGP to OSPF statement. That looks good. Now for the export. Looks good. The import. Looks good, and the community. Okay, so now this is all set to go. And hopefully that verification command will now work. So here's that verification command. Ah, perfect. So, yep, this is exactly what we were expecting to see now that those issues were resolved. And we can do a show system compare, or sorry, show system rollback compare 1.0. We can see all the changes we needed to make. So we needed to add a different address and remove that old one. Needed to remove this from MPLS. Needed to change the family that was added to this BGP group. So this is going to be MBGP, multi-protocol BGP. You can have multiple protocols in this. And we're going to have labeled unicast instead of just unlabeled INET VPN unicast. Then we added an entirely new BGP group with multi-hop, and it's going to go all the way to PE2, quite the distance. And then we just made the LO0 a passive route. So let's continue with that verification. All right, next command, we're going to stay on PE1, and it looks like we're going to go straight to looking at what it's like if we throw the baseball. In the previous verification commands, we first looked what it would be like if we were catching a baseball from CE1, I believe. But here we're going to do the advertising protocol command first and see what we're sending over. Oh, and it looks like we're not sending over anything at all, so that's going to be an issue. Well, so it looks like we've got the route that we want to send over, but we're unable to actually send it over. So let's do a show BGP summary. Oh, and it looks like both of our BGP connections are inactive. So they're going to need to come up. Let's take a quick look at ASBR1 and see if that's looking good now. Of course, that would be the issue if that's still booting up, but nope, looks like it's still there. Of course, we don't know what kind of config is on there now that it wasn't able to load back over to the option C, file show, or option C dot save. So looks like there's, let's see if I can just load up option C. So I'm going to start by doing a load override and then the initial. I have this so that it's not such a heavy load going from two large configurations. So now I've blanked out my config. Of course, that's something I can do because I have the luxury of configuring this out of band. If I were to do something like that in band, I would erase all of my configuration that allows me to be in band and cut off my arm. Okay, so hopefully that's going to bring up those BGP connections, fresh one, and that's the only reason why those were down to begin with, because it was configured for option B and not option C, because of the examples I was doing. It looks like it's going to be a bit more than that. Let's see if ASBR1 is either 2.4 or 2.7. So, okay, this is C1. That's always, for me, that's always good news if there's a error that is just so simple to overcome. So those big errors that are almost impossible to resolve are the ones that I take issue with. So yes, this is going to be 2.4. Oh, and 2.4 is established. So that was the issue on there. It looks like there's going to be more issues with 2.7, but 2.7 is going to be PE2. So hopefully for now, we're going to see that route from CE has made it out of this router. And we can worry about troubleshooting that BGP connection later. So no. Oh, of course, because 2.4 here is there. So we're going to need to be troubleshooting that BGP connection in order to have this command show up as it does in the documentation, because this is the address for PE2. So let's do this pipe refresh again and then jump over to PE2 and take a look at how 2.7 is configured. So 2.7 looks like it's configured just fine. Let's do a show BGP summary. And of course it's going to be active just like the other one was. We need to figure out why it's active. So I think a good first step, just see if we can even ping it. Because of course there could be issues where you can ping it, but it's still active. Like if it weren't, well, yeah, because if it weren't configured actually as part of the BGP protocol on the other side, you could see that. Although it might be an idle in that case. I think it actually would be an idle in that case. We could take a look. Edit protocols, BGP, show pipe display set. So, and this is the, okay, so this is going to be a neighbor here in this group here. So we can go ahead and remove this group. So delete, just delete everything, yes. Or let's just delete everything under the PE1 group. Okay, so now this is going to get rid of everything here, and I believe it will go from active to idle, but we will see. Oh, it's going into connect now. That's kind of encouraging. Maybe it just takes a long time for it to come up, but in any case, let's, okay, so it went back to active, and that makes sense. I think it cycles through. Let's take a look at that chart I had up. So BGP neighborship states here. I pulled up a chart last time, and it looks like if it's inactive, it will cycle. So it made sense that we saw it in connect there for a while. But let's see what happens if the other side changes. Oops. So I got this ready to be added back in. And sure enough, we can see that it's inactive now. Oh, sorry, it was inactive before. So we can see that there's no changes at all. It does not affect that, which of course makes a lot of sense because it can't even communicate with that side. We couldn't even ping to that side, so it makes sense that making changes on the other side wouldn't affect this at all. That's what you would expect. But in case anybody is lost, there's an easy one for you to catch on again. A softball. All right, so the video I think is getting long and it's gone completely off the rails. I was not expecting it to be this difficult to just run the verification commands and have to do this much troubleshooting and have a device just randomly reboot. But, and we can see where the, okay, so we can see that we're going to need to troubleshoot MPLS labels, which will be really exciting, but it's going to be a topic for another video. So hope you got something out of this one, and thanks for watching.